All right. So,
Yay,
kid,
Texas.
yeah, I've never lived in Texas, but I like the way you guys introduce yourself everywhere. From the great state of Texas, you gotta love that love for your state. So, so what exactly is a bail attorney?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, you start out as a regular attorney, and then when I first graduated from law school and started in private practice, I represented doctors and hospitals when they were sued. And, I developed a whole practice doing that. I've always been interested in appellate work, and there was a Med-Mal seminar I went to where they had a section on up-and-coming important cases from the Court of Appeals, and they had five cases, and 3 of the 5 were mine. And so because of my interest in appellate law, there was a bail bondsman who got in trouble. He had 45 default judgments, or default judgments when you don't file an answer when you're supposed to. Okay. And so he asked somebody, who do you hire to get those set aside? They said, we need an appellate attorney. And I know a really good one, and you should call him. And so that was the first work I did in the bail area, and then word of mouth passed or spread, and I started representing bondsmen when they'd have issues. And then I'm Texas counsel for several insurance companies now. I'm on the board of directors of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. I go to the legislature to support bills or oppose bills, to be a resource. And I've written a bunch of articles on bail law, and I've kind of because of my appellate interest, I kind of have I look at the legal issues from the appellate world, from the bail world, and so I've written a lot of articles on bail reform as a result.
Oh, good.
The reason Ken is with us today is to talk about the FBI crime stats. And we've heard a little bit about this, but we're not experts, so it's actually great to have you here to talk about this. So tell us what's just going on in general with the FBI stats compared to what is going on in the cities.
Well, this really first came up 2 years ago, really, in the midterm elections, because there was this whole issue about crime was increasing, and we were starting to see problems in our urban areas, and we had one side of the political spectrum say, no, crime is not increasing. Look at the FBI statistics. Yeah. And it's just a perception versus reality issue. And I even did a debate with a representative of Civil Rights Corps, which is this law firm that's activist law firm that's filing federal lawsuits all over the country on bail issues and losing them. But they did it. They were arguing the national talking points. I really think they came from them. Oh, it's just a perception issue, but crime is not really increasing because look at the FBI statistics. So here we are, we just finished a presidential election, and that was the argument. But I wrote an article for the Attorney at Law magazine probably a month ago now, and the point of it was there's reason to call into question the FBI statistics. And the reasons are the FBI just changed over to a new system of reporting and gathering this data 4 or 5 years ago. And it requires an investment of infrastructure, of equipment for all the local police forces. And so and they've been slow in changing over. And several of the largest police forces in the country, LA and New York, were not even tied into the system. So, scientists were saying, look, it's incomplete data, and there are other federal agencies that track crime, like CDC tracks homicides, and their data was showing a 20% increase instead of what contrary to what the FBI statistics were showing. And then Trump was pointing out the DOJ surveys on crime that they've been doing for decades, and that survey was showing a substantial increase of crime pretty much across the spectrum. And we don't even have to get into all the statistics on carjacking and stuff like that. So I wrote that article, and I was just saying, there's reason to call into question. Well, 9 days after my article was published, the FBI changed their statistics. Yeah. Suddenly, after all these years, instead of showing crime going down, it was showing crime going up, and it's still incomplete. And so suddenly, the Democrats lost all of their their one argument on why crime was not increasing was the the FBI statistics. And so immediately they did a 180-degree turn, and that's why they spent the next week or two saying Trump is a fascist, Trump is Hitler, because they had no argument on crime anymore.
So my experience is I lived in Chicago most of my life, and I lived in Denver, Seattle, and now Vegas. And when they keep saying the crime is going down, I'm like, I mean, I knew it was just common sense wise that that's not even possible because I pay attention to stuff. Crime is a thing for me. And go back to Chicago, they were caught, had to be like 15, 20 years ago, trying to reduce the murder rate by saying accidental shootings or suicide or gun misfire. And the only reason they got caught was because one of the news channels actually spent 24 hours a day listening to the police scanner and kept really detailed notes. So the question I have for you is, when a government entity mislabels crime, should there be charges brought against them for that?
Well, should there be consequences? Absolutely. We have a much more current example of that out of Houston, Texas, and Harris County, like the third largest county in the country. I mean, they had a big press conference saying crime is going down, crime is going down. And, there's a political incentive when you're the incumbent to say crime is going down. But then they got a new mayor, and a month later, suddenly they had a press conference to announce that the city police department had improperly closed over 260,000 criminal cases with the notation lack of personnel.
And the new mayor called that out.
It was after he was elected, so yeah, I think it was a consequence of him. And the police chief had to resign ultimately. And so, yeah, it's easy to manipulate the numbers to show crime is going down when you close 260,000 cases. And, that has an impact on the FBI statistics too, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it does. So then Houston, they have a pretty good mayor then, as it sounds like. Is that?
Well, he's new, and I would say he's finding his footing. But he's an experienced politician, and he's kind of navigating the middle between the two parties. He is a Democrat, but he's law and order Democrat.
Oh, good.
But he's also take no prisoners kind of. He used to be in the state Senate, and I've testified before his committee before. And if I've been there to testify against his bill, and if you're there to testify against one of his bills, you're going to get yelled at. And so I got pretty used to being yelled at when he was proposing bills.
Good for you.
So I know that crime was really going down in the 90s and early 2000s, and I was wondering if you had ever done any comparison to the modern spike with the 1980s and 1970s. Is it as bad as it was back then, or are we still down from there, or how does it look compared to then?
Well, we've had so I would like to compare what we're going through now as we're repeating that cycle that you're referring to from the 60s. In the 60s, we felt more safe, so we became more forgiving in our criminal laws. And then as a result of that, crime started to go up. And then the two political parties couldn't agree on how to address it. What really happened is one party refused to participate in fixing the system. And so we had a backlash. And as a result, we had Reagan and we had the war on drugs. And so right now, we've been having that same cycle happen again. We were, in the late 2019, I guess, 18, 17, we were more forgiving on our criminal laws because we felt safe, and we've had a huge swing to the left. Look at what happened in California, and where they decriminalized theft under $950, and they did it in a very crazy way. They did it with lying to the voters, in my opinion. And as a result of that, the current DA was defeated by 22 points in LA County. And that proposition that decriminalize, or the effect of it was to decriminalize theft, was rolled back substantially with a new proposition in the election this month by 20-something points. So I think we're having that backlash pretty heavy right now, where we're swinging back to the right. But the problem is, and this is where the left just they just missed the mark. They could have prevented the pendulum from swinging too far to the right by moderating their position, by recognizing that things were not working, but they refused, and so the pendulum's going to swing pretty hard to the right, and it won't stay there very long, because when it went to the left, it was unacceptable to the public when it went too far, because the public demands public safety. But when it goes too far to the right, what the demand is going to be, let's hold everybody in jail until their case is decided and then go send them to prison. Well, the public's not going to be willing to pay for that.
Right.
Right. So actually, I sort of touched back on that when the California law saying this shoplifting, or I think you said 950 is not, they won't even show up. Chicago did that in around 2005. And they put the mark at $600.
Wow.
So all the 24-hour stores or the late night open stores just hire big employees. And for some odd reason, we found a bunch of beat up people in alleys. Drag them out back and beat the hell out of them.
Well, and the way California did is the referendum changed certain felonies to misdemeanors, and the argument was, well, they'll still have to answer for their crime, but they'll be able to find jobs because they're not convicted of a felony. But then when they changed it to a misdemeanor, the DAs in our urban areas said, well, we're no longer going to prosecute it. So that's how they lied about it and then decriminalized it.
Yeah. So I've got a question on no cash bail.
Yes, sir.
What effect does no cash bail have on the crime rate?
Well, when that's a great question, because you think about it and say, well, how does the release mechanism that we use affect crime? And it does it very much so. And let me just say that we have different types of release. We can release you on a private surety bond. We call it different things, different places, but let's just say on a bond provided by the private industry. Right. Or we have something called simple release, where you're just going to be released on your promise to come back. In California, it would be called release on no bail. Released on zero bail. In New York, it'd be called release on no bond. And in Texas, it'd be called release on a personal bond. And then, cash bonds, like you've mentioned Chicago and Illinois. We've had all this debate about cash. We've got rid of cash bonds in the state of Illinois. Well, that's a cash bond. That's not a private surety bond where you put up either 10% of the amount of the bond to the court or the full amount of the bond in cash to the court. But we have the private surety system. We have some type of simple release, and those have completely different failure to appear rate. So the private industry, it has less than a 10% failure to appear rate, and simple release has at least a 50 or 80% failure to appear rate. I did a podcast with the DA in California. They use simple release for all misdemeanors in California. He said they have an 80% failure to appear rate. Houston, Texas currently uses simple release for misdemeanors, and they have an 80% failure to appear rate over that, according to HarrisCountyCourtWatch.com. I'm looking at 2 years worth of data. And when you miss court, your case, criminal cases are unique. They have to be put on hold until you come back. And like in California, on misdemeanor cases, there's a time limit. The clock is ticking. So if your case isn't resolved within a certain amount of time under the Speedy Trial Act, it's dismissed. So it's a catch-22. You don't show up. They can't make you come back unless you come back on your own, because it's a misdemeanor. And so if you stay gone, they dismiss your case. Well, so the problem is, no cash bail creates chaos because the failure to appear rate is so high. Chaos creates pressure to dismiss cases. Dismissing cases is perceived by criminals as a green light to commit more crime. And so you think, oh, well, the way we release somebody, that didn't have an impact on crime. It has a huge impact on.
You see, it's funny you mentioned that, because when I started doing some research on this, and almost every article said it has no impact on crime. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. So
yeah, and there's a reason why there's all these think tanks that are coming out with studies, and they really cook the books. And it's really the effect of George Soros. And there's books and many articles that are written about this, but George Soros has a plethora of organizations that he supports. But you can break them into four categories. There's the group that will give you money to get you elected, and then there's the second group after you're elected. They they invite you to seminars and they give you, here's the quid pro quo. Here's what you're going to no longer do as a DA that was supported by us. And they're terrible things. You're not going to seek enhancements anymore. So a drug dealer found with 30 pounds of meth is going to get a 2-week sentence because he's just going to be charged with possession instead of all the enhancements and get 30 years. And then there's the third group, which is the groups you're talking about, that are all these think tanks that are releasing cook the book studies that say, oh, you're safer for releasing more people from prison. And then the fourth group they have is PR firms that will give you press releases that you will issue saying, I'm starting these new policies and these studies show that they will not increase crime. And it's all just crap.
Yeah, because the reason I was bringing that up is when I saw that the article, all of the articles saying the crime doesn't go up, I knew of a story out of Denver or out of the Denver area where a man stole a car, got arrested, got out no cash bond, and that afternoon got arrested again for stealing another car. So I want to find that story. So I kind of went to Google real quick, put man arrested, blah, blah, blah. And I couldn't surf through all the stories. Apparently, there is a lot of people committing crimes who got out with no cash bail within the next 24 hours. So,
well, you know, we were keeping track. We were looking for records of people during COVID, and I think the record was like 5, 6, 7, 8 times someone being arrested within 24 hours because they were just being released.
Hell, I would try and just break the record. Like, how high can I go?
Well, yeah, some of them were committing crimes trying to break into cars, stealing cars from the parking lot of the jail as they were leaving.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, actually, wasn't there a Congress member who got carjacked in D.C.?
Oh, yeah.
There was a Supreme Court justice. One of them got...
Do you have another question?
I was wondering, so the discrepancies in the FBI stats, do they only track like violent crimes, or is it violent with theft, or is it like all crimes, like, embezzlement and other things that, maybe we don't want that kind of stuff, but it's not a danger to society?
Well, let me make 2 points on that. Number one, there's a whole class of things that they track, and you have to have certain equipment, and it's automatically reported. So if you want to look at the statistics, you could. We don't know whether it was nefarious, that they were thinking Trump was going to win, and 2 weeks before the election they decided to change the stats, or whether another police unit or police group got the equipment and got into the system, and then they just updated all their data, and that's what caused the change in data. Now, the other thing that I want to comment to you about is this, there's some crimes that are not really, we shouldn't be too concerned about. And this theft under $950 started out as that. And let's look at the impact that's had on California. I mean, stores are closing left and right because they can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting.
Right.
And, drugs use around those areas have just become rampant because in conjunction with that, we're no longer prosecuting some drug crimes. So what's the impact of that on commercial buildings? In San Francisco, we've got buildings that have sold for 30 to 50% of their value just 4 years ago. In Minneapolis, that has the same problem. We've got 2 buildings that sold for 9% of their value from the last time they sold. And we've got the commercial property default rate has gone from 5% to 40%. And so if we say, well, are there some crimes that don't really hurt anybody? Those very crimes are fixing to impact cities' taxes tremendously on what they're collecting, because at the very least, the property value is going to go down for their commercial properties. But really the problem is they're closing and they're moving out because the counties won't keep their businesses safe for people to patronage.
Well, I mean, we're a couple of libertarians here, so like when you say tax revenues might go down, we're like, let's do more of this kind of crime. So even you have to admit, for example, having a pet squirrel in your house, and then having the cops come and raid your house and kill your squirrel.
And the raccoon.
And a raccoon as well. Sorry. That's kind of ridiculous, right? Like the squirrel's not hurting anybody. They're not driving down property values for anyone. So but I was just wondering, instead of going hard on that point, do these stats that were these FBI stats, do they take account of that, or is it only certain types of crimes? That was kind of more of the question I was asking.
I know you were asking, and I was trying to, in a finesse way, in a really smart sounding way, to say I don't know the answer to that.
Tricked me. I thought you answered the question.
I didn't know if you would know that answer or not because it's just something.
But I will say, what was the name of the squirrel? Was it
Peanut?
Peanut and Fred.
One of my favorite memes that came out the week after the election was it took Lord of the Rings, and when Gandalf was Gandalf the White, they took that and it showed a white squirrel and it says, "I am now Peanut the White, and I'm here at your crucial moment, and I will be with you." And it was hilarious.
I always make sure people bring up the raccoon because as a child I had a pet raccoon. So I'm kind of partial to the raccoon.
Oh yeah. Well, and I really haven't followed that story other than from the standpoint of how crazy it was, and it impacted probably a small percentage of the voters from that area because it was insulting. I mean, we can't fight crime, we can't hold people in jail, but we're gonna euthanize Peanut and the raccoon.
Right. Yeah. Hey, thank you. It's another example of government overreach. But so here's my question with the election, and as Trump's kind of bringing up the cabinet and understanding there's a difference between local and federal law. Do you think Trump's going to have a big impact on the crime rate across America?
Well, yes. One of the biggest things I think that the office of the president does is bring a bully pulpit to issues.
Yep.
And so, you can see the freak out right now by just his nominations, and he's nominated his attorney general, and there was a tremendous freak out over who it was.
Yeah, a little bit.
And the rumor is that that's not even going to be the biggest freak out because he's going to nominate his FBI director probably next, and that one is supposed to be even a bigger bomb.
Kash Patel, I think,
he still owes the Libertarians our person. Yeah, he has not confirmed that yet.
So Trump did promise because we invited him to the Libertarian convention, and he promised to put one Libertarian on his cabinet. So we're waiting for that.
Well, there's the speculation. There was some speculation about who that would be, and the reaction to just the speculation was glorious to watch. But I think that he will bring a spotlight to the crime issue. I mean, and even if he doesn't, let me tell you, I've been telling people, that I know we're stuck in this identity politics, and the Democrats are voting. I mean, they're hoping that the abortion issue would save them, and it did not. But I was telling people, for just one election, vote on crime. Yeah. If you vote on crime this election, then suddenly the Democrats will go back to be a law and order party. And so even if Trump doesn't, you're going to see this metamorphosis, this battle, this civil war in the Democrat Party because crime is an issie.
Well, AOC removed all her pronouns off her X account today, so I think we're moving in the right direction with that.
So we're actually both in Chicago, and I remember Mayor Daley, and he was no nonsense, tough on crime Democrat. I mean, yeah. Well,
Trump got stuff done. Trump had a huge commercial that he played in Texas. I'm sure he played everywhere, but they're fighting for they them. Trump is fighting for you, and it was such a brilliant commercial.
He had some great commercials. So I've kind of gone through all my questions. I think, Dave,
I do have one more. It's kind of a nerdy stats question, and you might not have the answer to this either, but it's just something that was interesting to me. So I was wondering if there's any qualitative difference about the victims of crime more recently. So, for example, we know that most murders are committed by someone the victim knows. Is that starting to change? Like, is it more random, or is it just more the same?
No, let me make 2 points about that. On murders, we know that 50% of all murder victims in the United States currently are young black males. Yeah. And by and large, the murderer of those young black males are young black males as well. And, one of the things that just drives me crazy is in this bail reform debate, we have flipped it, and somehow we're favoring the murderer over the victim in the name of social justice. And they're both, everybody bleeds red, but when the murderer is murdering someone of the same race and we decide that we need to favor the murderer over the victim. It's day's night and black is white, and it's crazy. But where this bail reform movement has done the most damage is in the area of domestic violence. Because, let's say that you are being abused by your significant other. And I think one of the shocking things about that is probably 50% of domestic violence victims are male. So, yeah. I mean, it's not a statistics that is mostly women. But if you decide that you want to do something about this, you want to get out of this situation, bail reform has created a situation where you can't go to the police.
Right.
You have to, one, plan your escape. Two, plan your how you're going to live after you've escaped. And three, what's going to be your setup for giving you support. And after all that, it's almost an afterthought now that you will think about going to the police. Because we have too many examples. And the worst example that I can think of is Caitlin Guajardo out of Harris County, Houston, Texas, where her husband was arrested for leaving the scene of an accident and got a personal bond. So he got simple release. And then he got arrested for domestic violence while he was on that personal bond. So he's violating the conditions of his bond by getting a new charge. What did they do? They turned around and gave him another personal bond, and he got out. And within very short period of time, he went home and he killed his wife, and he stabbed her 30-something times in her stomach because she was pregnant, and he didn't want another man raising his child.
Wow. So we're at the point, like I said, we've gone through all of our questions, and in prepping for this show, I was trying to do some research, and I noticed you're kind of on the podcast circuit right now, which I think is awesome. So being that we're libertarians, I kind of know your view on like the bail and something like that by watching your other interviews. I'm more of a moderate libertarian, and he's more of an anarchist libertarian. The reason I bring this up is if you have any questions, if you're like data collecting anything and you want some difference of opinion, if you want to ask us questions, and you'll see we'll have very.
Well, I would love to talk to you let's talk about Oregon. So we've got Portland, we've got Oregon, where they've decriminalized almost all heavy drugs, and we've seen the terrible impact that's had. Drug use went from 6% to 12%, but they were setting a record every month for overdoses, and they finally allowed those statutes to expire, and so they went back to their old statutes. So what was y'all? I know y'all a libertarian position is we want to decriminalize heavy drugs, but did the Portland experience, the Oregon experience, impact y'all's thoughts on that issue?
Well, Portland is actually one of my favorite cities to visit. At least it was prior to 2020. I've been there a couple of times since COVID. But Seattle and Portland are kind of mirror images of each other. And it's disgusting what's happening in these cities. And the one thing people don't realize in these homeless camps is the sex trade. Young women are being they're being chained into tents, and they're being sold for drugs. There was one story out of Ballard in Seattle that a girl OD'd 3 times, and this final time she passed away. And the reporter said, "Oh, you may know her because she would be with this gentleman, and he would trade her for sex and drugs." And she died at 18, and she was with him for 3 years.
Wow.
And it was in the paper, and I'm like, nobody's freaking out about this. We have a confirmed 15-year-old being traded for sex and drugs in the homeless community. When they closed the jungle was a homeless camp under I-90 and I-5. They literally found women chained into tents. Some were underage. And they were spiked down and chained. So the homeless crisis in this country is way out of control. They've destroyed 2 very, very good cities that had very low crime rates before all this kicked off. So,
go ahead.
Well, see, my position on that is, you need the hammer of the criminal justice system on drugs. So the threat of sending someone to prison if they will not go to drug rehab. So we need the hammer, the threat of prison to encourage people to go to rehab, because rehab has a 75% failure rate when you go there for the first time. So we need to be able to send them back and back and back. And if you don't have the hammer, I think the lesson of Portland is they won't go. I mean, they set up all these programs for them to get treatment, and they took advantage of it 0.01% of the time.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I saw it.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer your question from my perspective. So when I saw these decriminalization laws come out in Oregon, I was critical of them right away, because what they always do, and this is both the left and the right, they always do this halfway thing where they say, "Oh, we're gonna let you use personal amounts, but it's still illegal to sell." So essentially what that does is it still keeps the black market there.
Yeah.
Yes.
The black market, they're going to have low quality drugs that are laced with all sorts of things. You have no restitution if someone kills you, if you OD, right? I mean, we don't see Budweiser poisoning people, for example. Your Starbucks is not poisoning people, right? You can just go to Starbucks and drink your coffee in a safe environment, and there's no stigmatism there. And the other reality is, whatever you do, people are going to do these drugs. You're not going to stop them. People do drugs in prison, right? We can't keep the drugs out of prison. So we need a whole radically new approach where, if you do a crime on drugs, yes, straight to jail, right? No tolerance for that kind of shit. But just doing drugs in your own house, I don't care. I
care deeply. I mean, I had a sister who had a car accident in 1989, the year I graduated from law school, and she broke every bone in her face. Yeah. And she started a 30-year drug addiction to prescription painkillers. Right. So it wasn't even illegal drugs.
To do this to you.
But I mean, I tried everything. I tried to get her put in jail, because the jail, I was a young attorney, the jail was a poor man's drug rehab. Yeah. And we've completely removed that as a possibility as the poor people's drug rehab. And I mean, my sister was strung out on prescription drugs for the next 30 years. It wasn't until her husband died, when I stepped in and had her declared incompetent, that we got her into an assisted living facility, and they monitored her drugs. She couldn't give them to herself, and her last 4 years was probably the best of her life for that whole time. Yeah. And so if we give up on drugs, we're giving up on crime. There's a book I read that said, 80% of all crime can be traced some way or another to drugs. And then I would make one more comment to your thing about, they didn't decriminalize it the whole way, and so they didn't go far enough. I mean, look at California on marijuana use. I mean, I read an article, and I even posted it, and then I realized that Facebook was not allowing that to happen right before the election. Shocker. But I did a podcast with the author. The legal drug trade.
We lost. Yeah.
Are you there?
In California for marijuana. Hear me? Oh yeah. And it's been taken over by the cartels. And I mean, not just shipping marijuana in, they're moving their whole operations into California, and they're bringing in workers too, because they're not scared. We've decriminalized marijuana. So what are you going to do when you find them on federal lands misappropriating the use of it to growing marijuana, and they brought in illegal immigrants to be their people? I mean, Mexico's not the only country doing that. We've got Russian gangs or cartels, and Chinese cartels doing the same thing all over the country. And you don't hear about it because Facebook and other social medias are editing it out before the election. The first time I heard it, other than that article I read, was Donald Trump saying it. Yeah. And then you came up with the apartment complexes being overrun by cartels, and suddenly you've got the mainstream media having a complete meltdown and going, "Oh, it's only a few, it's only a small number," and then you have J.D. Vance saying, "Are we in the United States or what?" Because only one. Yeah. I mean, so I have a problem with that. I mean, I think drugs are drugs, and when you start having, we're gonna do it legally, we're gonna raise taxes on it, we're gonna make a whole bunch of money. That doesn't ever happen. It doesn't
I
happen.
don't want any
The
taxes
money
on
never
it.
goes where it's supposed to
I don't
go.
want any taxes on it.
But actually, Southern Colorado has the same problem with the cartels moving in and growing
Yeah.
weed there because they were the first state to officially legalize marijuana. And the cartels, and they didn't have I believe when they first passed it, they didn't have a cap on how many plants you could grow. And the cartels were coming in and growing hundreds of plants legally. So they've now reduced that number down to kind of stop that. But yeah, I think.
Do you have any like contact info for our viewers? They can find you like a website or Twitter or whatever.
Sure. So if you want more information on the, criminal justice issues, you can go to our website, the pbtx.com, which is the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. So pbtx.com. We have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice issues. And we also have our own podcast called The Bell Post. There's a link to it on our menu, but you can also just go straight to thebellpost.com. And if all we talk about is criminal justice issues. You want to know what the New Jersey plan is? We've got an episode on it. You want to know what about charitable bail funds and why they're being restricted in states? We've got multiple episodes on it.
Awesome. Yeah, we had to cut the interview at this pretty close because we don't really do interviews like this, so we just signed up for a basic Zoom account, and they're giving me a minute 52 seconds before they shut us off.
Thank you for
I understand.
Yeah, but yeah, I did definitely want to thank you for talking to us. And if you ever want to come back on again, please reach out to us. We'll upgrade Zoom so we can talk longer if you want.
There are other people I've talked to, and we take whatever. I think you have to take an 8-minute break, and then we come back on. So yeah, it's crazy.
So yeah, no, this is great. I really love talking about this because crime is an issue for me too. I agree. It's fixed.
Well, and how can we fix an issue if one side of the electorate won't even admit it's a problem? So,
yeah.
Thank you very much for having me, guys.
Yep. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.